In the name of the United States Spiritist Council and all collaborating Spiritist organizations, we would like to welcome all of you to the 7th U.S. Spiritist Symposium. As many of you know, this is an annual event, which in previous years has taken place in Baltimore, New York City, Boston, Fort Lauderdale, San Francisco, Atlanta, and now in Texas. We are thrilled to host the 7th Symposium in our beautiful Lone Star State. The Spiritist Symposia have also become a symbol for unification of the United States Spiritist movement. This year, 27 organizations across the U.S. have sponsored this event, and many more are represented here today. We would like to thank the organization members of the United States Spiritist Council for promoting this event. We would also like to give our special welcome to those who came a long way to share this day with us, from many different states and from other countries. Before the opening prayer, we would like to invite the board members of the Spiritist Council to the stage.
We're missing Tanya. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We just wanted to take a few seconds to remind ourselves of how lucky we are to be able to be here, living in this great, wonderful nation that is the USA, a nation based on freedom that allows us to search for everything that we want to achieve, to follow our inspirations and achieve our objectives of growth and progress, and a freedom that allows us to be here today practicing our spiritual ideals, exchanging spiritual thoughts, and learning so much about all of our beliefs. When so many in so many other places who live under dictatorships, who live under difficult political moments in their countries, just do not have the same freedom that we have. And now we wanted to dedicate a few seconds of silence to all those brothers and sisters affected by these difficult moments that took place in Boston and in Texas.
Let's please join Cynthia Fabretti in our opening prayer.
Let us, as one, elevate our thoughts and hearts, turn our spirits to God, our loving Creator, to Jesus, the beloved Divine Master, our guide and role model, to Allan Kardec and the kind spiritual mentors and benefactors of this country present among us. We humbly ask for their protection, support, and assistance throughout this event and beyond. The feelings of joy and gratitude that we feel right now for the opportunity of being here, strengthening the fraternal bonds that unite us, sharing information and knowledge on the Spiritist teachings. May all of this sublimate our souls and give us a glimpse of what is yet to come. So be it. So many questions have been raised about life after death, about what happens once we pass to the other side of life. Today, we will have the opportunity of exploring this subject. The Spiritist literature contains information brought to us through the automatic writing of Chico Xavier by the spirit of André Luiz. His works describe life in the spirit world, filled with details and lessons, giving us the understanding of the spirituality and the interaction between the visible and invisible worlds.
Please welcome Brian Vosberg, the moderator of our panel on André Luiz. Brian was born in Peoria, Illinois, and was raised in a number of places across the globe, including here in Dallas, Texas. Working as a civil construction engineer, he was brought to the New Jersey area and was introduced to the Spiritist group Love and Light in 2005. As an avid understudy of Spiritism, he has participated in numerous Spiritist and religious book studies and has become an instructor for the Center teaching for adults, teens, and leading an introductory course of Spiritism for newcomers. Brian.
Good morning, everyone. Can we do a little better than that? Good morning. Good morning. That's better. We're starting off our program today with a panel discussion. And as the topic of the symposium is about André Luiz, we're going to take this opportunity to see how this premier series of books, these 13 books that follow shortly after the codification in terms of importance, and how this one spirit, as a man, spirit, and on his own mission, has helped enrich Spiritism, and how we can work together using the books of Kardec, along with the books of André Luiz, among many others, to enhance our enrichment of our knowledge of Spiritism. For this, we're going to introduce a panel. Our first guest is going to be Jose Mussi. If I would ask him for him to come up to take his place on the panel. We also have unfortunately, Elza Di Augusto will not be able to attend today, so I'll be speaking in her stead. And then we also have Patrick Jennings coming here to speak about André Luiz and his mission. Our first panelist, Jose Mussi, will talk about André Luiz, the man. And he was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Jose was married and with a young family moved to Canada in 1983 to obtain his Master of Science from the University of Waterloo and has lived in the city of Toronto ever since. He became involved in Spiritism through his wife Sandra, who was among the pioneers of the first Spiritist group of Toronto. Together, they founded the Toronto Spiritist Society in 2010 and are currently directors of the Canadian Spiritist Council. Please welcome to the podium Jose Mussi.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. It's a great responsibility and honor to be the first one to speak in the symposium today, but I do it very comfortably because it's such a wonderful topic. Couldn't have picked a better theme because André Luiz has become a friend of everyone who is interested, who studies Spiritism. And my role here today is to talk about André Luiz, the man. Now, he wasn't always our friend, obviously, because we never knew who André Luiz was until Emmanuel, the spirit guide for Chico Xavier, introduced him and told Chico that André was going to work together with him in a series of books. But what's most interesting is in the preface of the Nosso Lar book, which is the first one, Emmanuel writes something very, very interesting. He talks about the new friend. He introduces André Luiz But he already gives us a little bit of a warning, saying, you know what? Don't try to figure out who he was in his last incarnation. It explains it. It says that because in order to redeem a disgraceful past, that this kind of secrecy is important around the spirit. So he's giving us a hint that André Luiz is not as important as his previous lives as he would be in terms of the work that he was about to embark with Chico Xavier. But he does very warmly introduce André Luiz as a friend and a brother in eternity. Quite an important endorsement coming from a spirit like Emmanuel. So we only know about André Luiz through the books that he helped write with Chico. And as any one of us would be, we would not talk too much about ourselves when we have so much else to talk about. So in fact, there's very little information that we know about André Luiz, the man. So Nosso Lar is probably, of all of the books, the one that we're going to find the most information about André Luiz's previous, most recent life before disincarnating and starting the whole journey that we would eventually learn through all of the books that he helped author. So, these are basically the key facts that we know, right? We know he was a doctor, that he practiced for 15 years. We kind of think he was like a family physician. He lived in Rio de Janeiro. We also know, and we get this in little bits and pieces, so I put the chapter here on the book because you see that it's all over the place, and we get one or two sentences in each one of these chapters. He left behind a loving wife, 3 children, and we know that the oldest was a boy and the 2 youngest were girls. We know a little bit more about why he died, right? He had a couple of surgeries. He had intestinal obstruction, likely caused by some kind of a cancer that he, along the years, had started to get worse and worse, and this eventually led to his death. They believe that the source of this cancer could have been a disease, syphilis, that he might have caught early on. No information of how he got it. Did he get it close to his death? Did he get it early on in his life? But we also know that there was a lot of other damages to his liver, to his kidneys, or indication that through his life, which was not unusual at the time, and I guess it's still not unusual today, he was a bit of excessive on his drinking, on his eating. Don't we all continue to do this sometimes today? And, this all contributed to eventually to him having a serious problem that led to his death. These are a very interesting fact, but they're kind of mundane. It doesn't tell us too much about André Luiz, the man, as he was. Who was André Luiz, the doctor? We know about his mother. His mother, we see in the Nosso Lar how she comes from higher spheres to see her son later, not early on, but later in the book. And she tells that his father, Laerte, wasn't doing so well. He was still in the lower realms of the umbral. We also know that he was unfaithful to André Luiz's mother. And this really is the information we have, the facts. But we get a little bit more hints by kind of the spiritual diagnosis. So after André Luiz is in the early days of Nosso Lar, Dr. Clarencio is taking care of him. And this passage here kind of tells us what his diagnosis was. He says, however, you're often exasperating and particularly dark lifestyle, attractive, destructive vibrations. So this goes back to what we've learned, that our physical problems almost inevitably have moral behavior issues, problems, bad actions that we take. So it tells us that André was not a particularly, lively and happy person. He talks about lacking self-control, didn't know how to deal with others, maybe a little bit presumptions, a little bit kind of feeling superior to others. Not unusual for a doctor in the beginning of the 20th century. They were considered the elite of the intellectually society, of the society at the time. So it's not that surprising that a doctor would have these kind of feelings towards others and not necessarily treat everybody with humbleness. It's the one word that we don't see talked about André Luiz as a man, that he was a humble person. And the key thing is that the last phrase is, this frequently led you within the sphere of sick and inferior beings. So he was receiving these negative influences that he attracted to himself. So other interesting facts, I took a picture of Rio de Janeiro in early 1900s. Maybe we forget, right? For us who come from Brazil, we lived in Rio, we have an image of Rio. But back then, it was not the big metropolis that it is today. There were a lot of problems, a lot of poverty everywhere. And this is the setting where André Luiz was practicing. We also find out later on that he discarnated just a few years after his father, 3 years in fact, 1930. If you do the calculation backwards from the time that we know he spent in the Umbral and some of the unique, very little details that we get of the beginning of the Second World War, the conclusion that all of the experts have gone back is calculated that he effectively died in 1930, and his father had died in 1927. So later on we find in the book that as André Luiz is already going into Nosso Lar, his father is still struggling, probably with many other things that he had to resolve. So what was so special about André Luiz, the man? Why am I talking about André Luiz, the man? Was there something unique and special about him that made him of great interest? Well, if there's one thing that I'd like you to remember from my short speech, is this. There was nothing special about André Luiz, the man. He was just like us. He was a man of his time with the virtues of a good heart, but the vices of our physical dependencies. He was not a saint. He was not a grandiose man, at least not from what we can tell. So looking back at his incarnated life, we find really that there was no clues of all of the work that was to follow. So why is this important to us? Why am I saying this? Because to me, personally, it's assuring to me that we often are very critical of ourselves, especially as we become Spiritists. We try to always measure ourselves against very high standards, which is a good thing. But remember that our work never stops. André Luiz's real work, his real accomplishment had not yet begun the day that he discarnated. It was his work, his effort, at the moment he decides to take on the mission that we'll be talking about later, that make him really special to all of us. We are all humans, we are all fallible, we can't be perfect, but there was enough in him that led him to achieve all of the good things that we've come to learn and cherish as Spiritists in our studies. Now we remember the warning that Emmanuel gave us early on, that do not try to find out who André Luiz was. And as human beings, of course, we followed that order, right? That suggestion. Of course not, right? We are all CSIs, detectives. We want to know who was André Luiz. And there's been a lot of conjectures about who he was. In particular, two names have come up over and over, suggesting that that person might have been André Luiz in real life. Oswaldo Cruz and Carlos Chagas. Those Brazilians among us might recognize these two names. These were very important physicians in the early 1900s in Brazil. They had a fundamental role in defining what public health would become in Brazil. So I just wanted to give you a couple of information about these two very important people. So Oswaldo Cruz, he started an institute called the Oswaldo Cruz Institute. The building in the picture here is a beautiful building. For anyone coming into Rio, you can see it up in a hill. It's where most of the state-of-the-art, the latest research in public health occurs in Brazil. Oswaldo Cruz was also the first physician who really pushed for mass immunizations in Brazil, leading to the disappearance of many of the diseases that were common at his time. He is really an inspiring person, and his works will continue for many, many years, show the results in Brazil. The other person was Carlos Chagas. He was also a sanitary physician, worked on the same institute as Oswaldo Cruz, and he's best known, but not the only work he did, about detecting a specific disease came to get his name, Chagas disease. Is a disease that is common in some areas of Brazil. And for that, and for many other type of researches he made, he was also a very important physician. So why is it so important for us to know who André Luiz was? Well, I think, to me, the warning that Emmanuel gives in the beginning was not to hide or protect André Luiz alone, but protect us as well. We have this need to enshrine personalities, to find greatness in the great ones, and kind of put them on a pedestal and say, if they were great because of the work they did, they must have always been great. And Emmanuel is trying to protect this from ourselves. We do not need to know that André Luiz was one of these two doctors, which, by the way, everything that we heard about André Luiz does not match anything in the life of these doctors. So the people basically say, well, that's because they didn't want to tell us the truth, so we wouldn't know that they are these two people, which kind of counterintuitive. But in any case, the bottom line is André Luiz became a very important figure to us. He provided a lot of insights, a lot of information that has helped guide the Spiritist thought from what Chico Xavier presented to us. His life, just before he disincarnated, was just the beginning. We should cherish the work that he has done as a collective. We have to move away from the individual and focus on the overall mission. Thank you very much.
And I was noticing while sitting in the back, you were talking about how you have these physicians that are taken about to be as these could be who André Luiz was when he was last incarnated. But at the same token, we're also acknowledging the fact that once he became a spirit, he got rid of the name, or as he was putting his names to paper, because he didn't want to focus on his past. He wanted to keep us focused in on his future. And you also brought up a point, being a flawed character. What does that say for us? As we look around, we can sit there and say, if he started from a flawed being, a flawed beginning, and went on to do great things, we can also do the same. Now, as Elza unfortunately was unable to attend for us today, I was asked to prepare, on the spur of a moment, some comments and some notes about André Luiz as a spirit. As we know, André Luiz became known to us in 1944 with the publishing of No Solar, the first book of the series. In this, he's describing himself after he disincarnated into what he experienced. As was mentioned already, He was a flawed individual. He was not a perfect being. So when he crossed over, the problems he had in his life came back for him. His pride and his sufferings, the things he did to himself to make himself an unintentional suicide, were coming back to him. It put him in the lower zones, umbral for the Brazilians in the room. This region, and he's describing in detail, is not a nice place to be. And he's going through and he's seeing the suffering, but at the same token, he's also not aware of the passage of time. Eventually, he comes to the point where he sits down and he prays. And as soon as he prays, everything opens up, the rescue comes, and he's helped. And for those who've seen the movie or those who haven't, he goes through and he's recovering. But he was a doctor. And we know doctors make the worst patients because they think they know better. Not always. And this was especially true for Andre Luiz because he thought, okay, I'm a physical doctor, so I should know the spiritual body just as well. He didn't. He was quickly made aware of the differences between a physical body and a spiritual body. He was learning as he was going on that growing up, even as on the physical level, it prepared him part way. But now there's more. He's able to see as a spirit, and through his writing to us, he's showing us how his examples have come in, linked us together, how our spirit connects to our body, how our body and the spirit work together. Whatever happens in one shows up in the other. And through the course of his books, he was sitting there describing to us the effects of vampirism, spiritual parasites that we can't see in the physical body, but show up in our paraspirit and thus reflects onto the human body. He's describing to us the cities of different levels. He's showing us, depending on our moral evolution, what cities look like. We all want to be in El Salar, and yet he's saying there's places better than that. There's also places lower than that. And we will go to the place that suits us best. And he's describing these things, which is for us, I would say, would be a good indication on how to improve. He's introduced us as a spirit to equipment that we don't have in the physical world, a psychoscope. He's sitting there looking at, they can look at our paraspirit through this device and see the things that we've done, not in our past life, but in all our many reincarnations combined, and see the problems that we've had that we've yet to resolve. As a spirit, we're seeing him grow. We see his progress in the course of these 13 books, transition from a doctor of physical medicine to a doctor of spiritual medicine. And he's enlightened us in ways we don't even know. He's introduced to us way back in like the 1940s about the purpose of the pineal gland on the spiritual side of life. Modern science today is still wrestling with that issue. It has not been resolved in modern science. They're working on it. I know we have Dr. Sonia Doi with us, who's part of the medical Congress, and they've been discussing this through their symposiums on the meanings and the workings of the pineal gland. But for modern science, it was, whoa, this is totally new. And that wasn't the first time he mentioned this. Other things that he brought to us, knowledge of a medical nature that we didn't even know about. And as such, we've taken his teachings, his learnings, to help improve our side of life. But that's going into the next panelist. We see from his actions as a spirit, his growth, from a being that's flawed to a being of immense power, of immense stature within the spiritual ranks. To the fact that he was even picked to say, we have a special mission for you, says something about his efforts of self-improvement, his workings on an internal level, on how he improved himself. became an example for us. And not only for us, by illustrating how spirits are working with us. We have spirits on street corners helping the whole world over improve. And he says, it's not just the individual, it's all of us. We will improve you individually. If you can improve yourself, then you can go ahead and you can help improve others. The moral improvement of ourselves and our society. Together, when we improve as a whole, we can see great improvements. And many of these examples, we've recently had many tragedies this week. So we've seen some bad things, but we've also seen some great things. We've seen cities come together, to pull together, and do many great works to help each other out. And this is many of the things that Andre Luiz shows. He shows how in events of crisis, even at the end of Non Solar, when World War II is about to start, the spirits are mobilizing. We see them coming to the aid of humanity and the incarnated beings. They're here. They're helping us. And we are helping them. And we work together. They help us, we help them. And together we are improving the entire world over. By the same token, he acknowledges we have free will. We make the choices. We let make the choice that we will improve. Just as he improved, we will go on to do great things. We can make Non Solar be Earth through our efforts. And with this grand scheme of things, as a spirit, we're seeing all these wonderful examples. We're seeing all these different inner workings with the spirit, that spirits do. And Andre Luiz was not a spiritist in the body. He got introduced to it on the other side of life. And even though he says Spiritism isn't the end-all, but it's a step in the right direction. It's helping promote a greater unity, a greater world health that helps bring everybody together and helps promote this moral upbringing that we can use to better and enrich our lives. So, in this final closing, again, I'm preparing this on the fly. Andre Luiz has this one line, and I think it sums up pretty nicely. Life is perfect symphony. We should emit notes of its maximum glorification. However, when we cause its notes to be off-key, we are compelled to stop and reestablish the broken harmony. Taken from the book Missionaries of Light. With that, I will thank you for my opportunity to do notes, but as I'm also the moderator, I had to go on with the next topic.